And just a warning now, I'll let you know that we're being recorded on video now. Just
Thank you for letting me know.
yeah, and
But you haven't scared me one bit. So again, is this the light behind me?
no,
I
yeah,
can get rid
it's
of it.
fine. Yeah, somehow you have
Okay.
there's an illumination on your face, which and the backlight is kind of separates you from the wall, which is a very decent look. So
Thank you very much. I have a side lamp here.
that,
In theory, you will be receiving an email.
great.
But anyhow, let's continue.
All right,
Yes.
so I'm gonna do this. How I'm gonna do this is I'm gonna basically slate it by saying, "Hi, this is." And by the way, just to let you know, I'm not in the visual aspect of this video. Only you are. So
All right.
it's your face talking, and my face is basically disembodied voice asking you questions that you'll be answering on video. Um,
All right. The
and
godlike disembodied voice.
there you go. And that's it. And that's going to be posted on my blog at some point in the very near
Fantastic.
future. I'm very excited about this project. I'm, this is the part of I wanted to tell you this. This is the part of book publishing that I really love, is actually making, creating, thinking, and brainstorming a new book. It scintillates my creative process, and I really love doing it. And then, of course, after the book is published, then I'm like, I give a shit. But it's of course I have to do all that stuff because otherwise we don't sell books. But this is the part that I really enjoy. So I'm very excited about this. This book
Thank you,
is
Jim.
really going
You
to
worked
be.
very hard, and I'm honored that you have selected my book. I really am.
No, it's a
Really,
perfect sequel to what I've done so far. I think and
it
it was
is.
nice of
I
Jelly
agree.
Boy to introduce you to me because he knew that was the story that we were on track. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's
Well, I've
cool.
read all your books, so I think they're great, and I'm glad that I'm going to be the next one.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very excited about this. Okay, so here we go. Um, I can read the question to you first before we do the actual slating of the videotape. So you're
Whatever you want to do.
I mean,
It doesn't bother me to
yeah,
just do
okay,
the
so
whole
I'll just do it on
Yeah,
camera then. Okay, so here we go.
sure.
I'm gonna start now. Hi, this is Jim from Vaudevisuals. I'm here with Aaron Smith, the author of the upcoming book Natural Born, which is the short title. It's a much lengthier secondary co-title, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Aaron's been working on this for quite a few years. It is a spectacular piece of work, and I have some questions for him regarding this project. It's quite an undertaking. So, the sources note that you seemed surprised to learn that Sideshow and Natural Borns performers still exist when you began working this project. I sound like I'm reading something. It's really terrible. What what were your preconceived notions about sideshows before you began working on this book project, and how did those notions evolve as you conducted interviews and learned more about the lives of your subjects? There you go.
Thank you for asking. And basically, I had written my first book, Circus Jerks, about my own experiences in Ringling Brothers and the Big Apple Circus when I was 19 years old. It was a first person autobiographical account. And I had published that book and was selling it and was trying to think of ways to promote it. And I was actually unemployed at the time. This was during COVID, and I was trying to think of something new to write about. And as I was looking into Sideshow Hootenanny, I saw that they offered membership discounts for Natural Born. And I think, Natural Born, what is that? Because I think, for most people, you hear that term, you might think about it from the U.S. Constitution. You have to be natural born to be president. But it actually means something completely different within the Sideshow community. Um, it means that you are naturally born with your disabilities. Now, the really blunt, politically incorrect way to say it would be natural born freak. And sometimes disabled sideshow performers who are taking back the F word will sometimes refer to themselves as a natural born freak. I think they are the only people who are allowed to say that. Okay.
Yeah.
So the F word is something I tried not to use too much in this book. And I was actually quite happy define the term like natural born, which I think is a non-offensive way to refer to people who have disabilities. Now, I'm not a disabled person, so that is my perspective, but that is my impression. People in sideshows, they go, there are some naturals here, the natural born performing. One of the performers I met who was natural born said, "Oh, I've got a natural to introduce you to." People in the sideshow community, disabled and non-disabled, will use the term natural born to describe disabled performers. So I thought that was kind of cool that they found this very interesting phrase that really jumps out at you. And I thought, if there are membership discounts for natural born, that implies there's more than one of them out there, which means, okay, I didn't know there were any disabled people performing in sideshows. All right. I mean, I'd seen Matt Frazier 10 years ago, so I wouldn't say I'd never heard of it, but I didn't think it was such a thing that they'd be getting membership discounts. So as soon as I realized that there were a few of these people out there, a few of these naturals performing in sideshows, I decided immediately that I was going to find out who they are, and I was going to talk to them, and I was going to interview them, and I was going to write a book about them, and I was going to do it right now. And so this was in May, I think it was May 26, 2021. I've been working on the book ever since that minute that happened. Because when I get an idea like that, and I've written some books before, the idea will not go away. I know when it happens, this is it. It's the epiphany. And I'm doing this book no matter what.
Yeah.
Now, it is a controversial topic. I'm well aware that I do not have physical disabilities, and I am writing a book about disabled people. That is a thing that I am doing. I know that I can never truly capture or present the perspective of a natural born sideshow performer unless I actually talk to them and interview them, and they can tell us what it's like to be a natural born sideshow performer. So as someone who was in the circus, 2 circuses actually, when I was a teenager, I've always been obsessed with circuses. My grandmother took me to see Ringling Brothers when I was 5 years old. That was the first time. I've always loved circuses. I mean, what is there not to like? It's amazing. It's an amazing American culture. It is more recently that I became interested in sideshow. There weren't many sideshows around when I was a kid. There was a distasteful impression of them, which is coming from this place where you do not want to exploit and make fun of disabled people. You don't want to do that. And I think that sideshows were generally viewed in this negative way. And when I was growing up, that what I understood them to be. It's almost like, oh, it's a good thing that they don't have them anymore, though I think there probably were a couple out there. Thank you, Ward Hall. He was probably out there in the 1980s, 1970s. My mother gave me a book when I was a little kid. I was in Belgium. We were visiting family. She gives me this book. It was called Very Special People. This was a novel that was published in the 1970s. And you may have heard of it. So it is basically structured similar to my book. Not exactly the same, but it's basically a biographical profile of many different naturals from a long time ago. And it is a history book. There is another more recent book, kind of similar to this, called The Wonders. I think that was published in 2018. And it does include a very brief Matt Frazier reference at the very end. But 98% of that book is a history book. I did not write a history book. I wrote a book that represents the 21st century natural-born sideshow scene as it is today. It is a small scene. Maybe 5 or 6 sideshows operating at any given time. I interviewed 15 naturals for this book. I know for a fact there's at least 5 or 6 others that I haven't spoken to, who either didn't want to do it, or I reached out to them, or they don't doing it anymore, or whatever. So basically, you're talking about a couple dozen people who I know of who are either performing in sideshows or have done it recently. I'm sure there are more out there. One of the questions I ask Sideshow Naturals is, how many of there are you? The biggest number anyone ever said to me was 100.
Oh.
Generally, the number is much lower.
Oh.
So, that's how I came up with the idea, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. I also don't think anyone else is really writing a book like this. I'm not sure about that, but I haven't run across anybody else. I don't think a book like this has been written ever, except maybe for something Ward Hall wrote, and it's out of print, and I couldn't get a copy of it. It's My Unusual Friends. Ward Hall wrote that book. When I met with his former partner, Chris Christie, in Florida earlier this year, I mentioned it. He said, "Oh, I've got a stack of those books. I'll send you one." And I gave my address. Yeah, I haven't gotten it yet. Still waiting. Maybe I'll give Chris a call. I didn't want to bother him, though. It was really cool of him to take time out of what he was doing and meet with me.
So, my second question, I have another question for you. So
yeah.
You interviewed many natural-born performers for this book. Did you face any challenges in gaining the trust of these individuals and persuading them to share their personal stories? Were there any ethical considerations or dilemmas that you grappled with while working on this project?
That's a good question, because that is very core to the nature of this book. So I'm well aware of the fact I'm a non-disabled person interviewing disabled people and representing them in this book, and I take this very seriously. Okay. This is a real project, and I want to get it right. Most of the Sideshow Naturals I contacted agreed to be in the book. Most of them were very cool about it, and I was amazed that they would answer me, this person they don't know, coming out of nowhere with these crazy questions. I mean, I contacted Kim Kelly, who's a journalist in Philadelphia, who has performed as a natural at Coney Island. She has acrodactyly. She calls herself the Lobster Girl. She also happens to be a journalist and a published author who has specialized in the labor movement. I was pretty intimidated to be talking to her, not because she's not a nice person, she's a very nice person. It's because, who am I to ask her these questions about her experience as a Sideshow Natural? Who am I to contact Kim Kelly and ask her to meet me in Philadelphia for lunch so I can take her to the Mutter Museum and look at jars of deceased disabled babies to ask her opinion on it? That's what I asked her, if she would do that, and she said yes. And she was amazing, Kim Kelly. She it was a big trust. You would ask me about trust. She, I guess took a risk, if you want to call it that, of meeting with me. She didn't know me too well. And we went to the museum, and it was an amazing experience to hear what she had to say about the remains of disabled people being put on display in a museum for me and her to look at. Now, recently, from what I've been told, in Philadelphia, the Mutter Museum has been considering closing its doors to tourists like you and me and not allowing us to come in and gawk at the remains. But from a mutual friend told me he saw Kim Kelly speak up at one of these meetings at the Mutter Museum and say she wanted it to be open to the public, that it meant something for her as a disabled person to go and look at these things. So I thought that was very interesting. So that is the example I'm using of reaching out to someone who doesn't know me. I mean, we had one mutual acquaintance, an editor from Pitchfork, but she didn't really know me, and she trusted me, and she met with me, and I take that very seriously. Yeah, I'm actually moved by the respect that some of these people showed me. Yes. Matt Fraser is another one who, I mean, he's like a movie star, and I'm reaching out to him, and I was intimidated to talk to him because I know he's a real serious person. I'd seen some of his work before. I'd seen it live at Coney. and he was very cool. Like, I was amazed. I met with him in person a couple of times, and I think he's amazing. And I feel like everyone loves Matt Frazier, and we're all very impressed by him. I also think he's an intellectual, and he is very real, and I think he demands respect. And I also think he is someone you don't want to mess with if you were so inclined.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think he's someone you want to mess with at all.
Right.
Especially since I interviewed him about how he fights in martial arts.
Yeah.
It's short arms. You're going to have to read the book to find out what he said. But you're not going to want to fight him after you
So
do that.
the next question I have for you
yeah.
is your sources indicate an interest in the concept of inspirational porn and how it relates to the portrayal and disabled people. Did you encounter any instances of inspirational porn during your research for the book? If so, how did you address it?
That's a great question, and I have an answer for you. Okay,
so
I do run across some terms. I did run across the term inspirational porn, and it was one of the things I had to look it up on Google. But you're like, what does that mean? Like natural born. What does that mean? So I was driving along with Jelly Boy, who is a clown, who is a sideshow clown. I know you know him, Jim. He is non-disabled, but he operated as what is less delicately known as a freak finder in the business, the old school sideshow recruiter of naturals. So Jelly Boy is in the book. We had an amazing time hanging out. You'll read all about it. One of the things that happened is Jelly Boy was driving me in his beat-up serial killer van from Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Oh, that's the joke. He's not really killing. It was full of swords, though, and flamethrowers and stuff. This van. So we're driving the van from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and we're talking about Matt Frazier. And he mentions, Matt Frazier used to do this thing called inspiration porn. Now, I know Matt has done some fairly risque things on stage, live, with his beautiful wife, So I thought that was kind of interesting. And actually, now that you mention it, I still haven't followed up with Matt about that. So I'm not exactly sure what he was doing. But the term inspiration porn, you don't have to Google it. What it really means is when non-disabled people become impressed in this sort of poignant, inspirational way by the amazing things that disabled people are able to do. I was once in a grocery store in a Publix in Florida, and they had, all these different books up there, as you're leaving, all these books on display. And one of them was like this self-help bestseller by a man who was missing a bunch of his limbs, and he was married with kids, and he presented as this very successful sort of person. And I wondered if this was the kind of thing they're talking about, because I don't know who this guy is, and I don't want to say anything negative about it. The way in which it was presented seemed to be, this is a success story. This is a disabled person who is a success story, and he's got it all. Look at this guy. If he can do it, what's your problem? I kind of got that impression from the presentation of the book. And I think when people use the term inspiration porn, what they are referring to is, maybe a book or a movie or something that shows the struggles of a disabled person for the basically entertainment or inspiration of a primarily non-disabled audience. I do think that is what it means. Now, is my book inspiration porn? I don't think of it that way, though I suppose, someone could broaden the definition of it to include my book if they wanted to, but I think of it more as a book that tells the tales of a bunch of disabled performers who have chosen Sideshow to be their artistic outlet, because it is the place, the stage, where they can really take over, and it is theirs. If you have a sideshow, people want to see a disabled performer go up there and breathe fire. Now you have a real sideshow. No offense to the sideshows that are currently operating without naturals. You can't really blame them, because the truth is, it is very difficult to recruit natural-born performers for sideshows. Despite the fact that there are tens of millions of disabled Americans, apparently there's only a small group that do the performing in the sideshow for whatever reason that is. So I wanted to tell their story because I wanted to know why they do it, because I had grown up with this sort of impression that sideshows were bad. But no one is forcing them to do it. There is a long and brutal history of exploitation. In some cases in sideshows, there were people who were actually slaves in antebellum America, disabled people who were put on display in sideshows. They obviously didn't have any choice in the matter. And there are also disabled people who were exploited and forced to do sideshow who were not technically slaves, but in reality they were. That is not what is happening today based on anything that I have seen. Everyone that I have talked to, every natural performing in the sideshow, all told me that they wanted to do it. Yeah, when I spoke to, he calls himself Shorty, okay? His real name is Aaron Woolen. He was born with sacral...
Oh. Froze.
Being exploited.
Hang up. Okay.
I'm exploiting myself. And I've heard that term a few times since he said it by other people. If anyone's being exploited, I'm exploiting myself. The point being that all the sideshow naturals in America, as far as I know, and I haven't met all of them, but as far as I know, they're doing it voluntarily because they want to. People will travel far and wide to go perform on the Coney Island stage. And in one last part of this answer for this question, I had originally viewed this book as naturals taking back the sideshow. But when I mentioned that to Jackie Mullen, the human tripod, she said the sideshow was always ours. We're not taking it back. It was always ours. And I guess what I'm trying to represent is this is really it. The sophisticated self-awareness that all the natural performers have. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how people look at it. They know that not everybody likes it. And they're very self-aware, and they're doing it on purpose, and they're doing it for a reason. It's very punk rock.
Next question. Okay. So, the sources referred to in the book refer to several historical figures in the sideshow world, including P.T. Barnum, Tom Norman, and the manager of the Elephant Man, and Ward Hall. How did these historical figures and the legacy of their shows inform your understanding of the modern sideshow?
I love that question. I can go through each one of those guys real quickly here.
Yeah.
So P.T. Barnum, look, I kind of liked the guy, but there were some issues. You know, he was the slave owner I was referring to earlier. He owned slaves. You know, there was an elderly black woman who he took on tour and displayed her. She wasn't really a natural. He just said that she was like 1,000,000 years old and used to take care of George Washington, and it was a lie. And he would transport her into states that did not allow slavery, and presumably didn't tell her. It was like a Juneteenth situation, and it's not great. Like, that dude totally fails the ethical test. Having said that, why are we still talking about P.T. Barnum? Because he was a hell of a showman. And there were cases like with Tom Thumb where, you know, the naturals who were working with him did very well and actually made lots of money. And there was this structure where he basically provided work and money to a lot of naturals who worked with him. And I think overall, he was, because of the slave owner past, I'm reluctant to say positive, but he really was a driving force behind this whole circus, sideshow, natural thing. And I'm going to give him a shout out for that, even though he's a flawed individual. You mentioned Tom Norman. Now I'm so glad you brought him up because, Matt Fraser had done a video where he talks about the Elephant Man, and he actually went to the location in London where the Elephant Man was exhibited, which is now a women's clothing store. Okay, it's still there. And it's across the street from the hospital where the doctor worked, who came over and basically attempted to save the Elephant Man. And then John Merrick went over to Europe for a while, and it got really bad, and he came back to the hospital. We all saw the movie. Okay, so Tom Norman's an interesting one because, speaking of the movie, when you see the David Lynch presentation, and I saw that when I was like 12 years old, it freaked me out. Okay, that the owner, I guess you could think of him as the manager, John Merrick, was beating him with a stick and locking him in a cage with baboons, and it was crazy, right? And he's like drunk and just completely humiliating and torturing this guy. Okay. That's basically how the good doctor presented Tom Norman. I don't know what that guy was really like, but Tom Norman knew long before that movie came out, like 100 years, 80 years before that movie, 60 years, whatever it was. He knew that people hated his guts because the doctor had written about him and presented him in this really negative way. And he actually wrote a rebuttal in a Sideshow magazine at the time, claiming that he was great and that the Elephant Man wanted to be exhibited, and it was a partnership, and he didn't treat him badly or anything. And when you see a picture of him, he's wearing a top hat and a tie. He doesn't look intoxicated. He looks very well dressed, and it's an amazing PR move that he really presented himself in that way. So who was the real Tom Norman? Was it the David Lynch version, or was it this, PR move that he did in the Sideshow magazine? I don't know. That could be a book unto itself. Mm. And now you also mentioned Ward Hall. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him. I would have loved to have met that guy. He died a few years ago. I had the pleasure of meeting his former partner, actually two of them. The two who are still with us, which would basically be Tommy Breen and Chris Christ. I met Chris Christ not that long ago in Florida, in the town of Gibsonton, the famous town of Gibsonton. You can read about that in my book. Chris was a very cool guy. I think he had seen it all. I could tell he had been in a traveling, he'd been in a circus and a sideshow. You can tell because he had a completely jaded view about travel. So, I was asking him like, oh, where did you go? Did you get to travel America? And he's like, it all looks the same through a windshield of a truck driving a circus convoy, as he's eating chipped steak in the Apollo Beach Diner. And as we're, and I grew up near there. I mean, we're both Florida men. And as he's explaining this to me on the TV behind his head, there's a headline, Florida man wrestles alligator, and there's like a picture of this guy wrestling an alligator. It was very Florida. It really was. I was born like not even 20 miles away from that diner where I met with Chris Christ. So Ward Hall, back to him. There is a very interesting documentary that Matt Fraser produced a number of years ago where he meets Ward Hall, and Ward Hall is like, oh my God, you have to be in my sideshow, and actually like holds his arms and stuff. And wants to hire him right on the spot. Though Matt Fraser ends up going with Coney Island. But it's an interesting scene. So Ward Hall is a guy who basically got into the business in the 1940s. And I think in the late 1940s, he ended up buying a sideshow, which was eventually named World of Wonders, which is now touring under the management of Tommy Breen. I got to meet him in person last summer, and I got to see him swallow swords and eat fire. He's an interesting guy because he looks so normal. He really does. He just looks so normal. He's your outside talker, Jim. He told me that when he first got into Sideshow, he wanted to get all these tattoos and stuff. And then, Ward Hall told him, no, you're the outside talker. That's what I want you to do. You've got to look normal. And then I realized, oh my God, that's what they did to me at the Big Apple Circus. Because I didn't look like a serial killer. So they put me out front to sell the program as the outside talker. Come on in! Because I was this 19-year-old guy who just didn't look that scary, you know? So that's what Ward Hall did with Tommy Breen.
That's
And
funny.
to this day, you know, he looks like a normal guy. And I think he's got, that works for him. You know, he's very friendly. You know, he's very jolly. You know, people want to kind of come in and see what he has to do. And you don't necessarily expect him to breathe fire. You know, he doesn't have tattoos on his face or whatever I might expect of that.
Mhm.
So Ward Hall, I just want to give a shout out to him because I think he was very open-minded. He toured for a very long time from the 1940s, I think, until the 2010s, I believe. And I think he just did a lot for Sideshow. He kept it going. There was one point where I thought, is there ever a time in American history in the 20th century where there was no Sideshow, even for one day? And you know what? I think there always was one. And it was always him. And if it wasn't for Ward Hall, I don't think there would be this book I'm writing. You know? I don't know if you'd have the kind of sideshows. You know, it's sort of like, it's like Dick Ziggin, you know, maybe he may, you know, he did get ejected from Coney Island, USA. But let's face it, Coney Island wouldn't be Coney Island without Dick Ziggin. And he was Natty Amos, one of the people I talked to, the patchwork girl. She said Dick Ziggin is what made Coney Island cool. And I knew when she said it that she was right.
Yeah.
But going back to Ward Hall, I just wanted to use, you know, Dick Ziggin and Tommy Breen as examples of what makes Ward Hall important. I think he's a historical figure. The New York Times gave him a great obituary when he died. I mean, they knew that he was a big deal.
Yeah.
And he deserves a place in history. And if he was still alive, you're damn right I would have interviewed him for this book.
Last question. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you hope readers will take away from this book? What kind of impact, if any, do you hope it will have on the way people view sideshow performers and disability more broadly?
I like this question because I wrote this book because from the moment I got the idea, I felt if there are naturals performing in sideshows right now, they deserve to be acknowledged. I just felt like this is such a big deal. More people should know about this. You know? Like, I want everyone to know about this. I want them to be recognized for what they do. You know, Jackie Mullen no longer performs, but I want people to know that she was Jackie the Human Tripod and that she did this amazing show that was incredible. And then one day she, well, disappeared for a while and no one knew where she went. And you'll find out about that in the book. But I just think these people should be acknowledged. All of them. Because I think it's incredible. And I also want people to know why they choose to do it. And I want them to explain it to you in the book. I generally use their words in quotes to explain that part. I don't see how I can really phrase it better or more accurately than them. I want people to think more about disability because there are tens of millions of disabled Americans. When I was growing up, you know, disabled people were separated from us. You know, like when I was in high school, you didn't see them so much. It was a deliberate thing. I think they should be more included in our society. You know, I would like people to please read my book with an open mind. You're allowed to hate my book. You don't have to like it. I'm not trying to offend anyone. But you are entitled to your opinion. I just want people to know that this is a scene and that disabled people are doing this. And just take a look at what they're doing. And then you can take away from it whatever you want. I guess if you ask me what do I want the takeaway to be, I'm inviting people to go look at a sideshow, to go buy a ticket and go to the sideshow and check it out. You know, Jackie Mullen had mentioned there were protesters at one of their sideshows. And they went out and they said, why don't you come in and see it? Because you haven't seen the show. You know, you don't know what you're protesting. There is a school of thought, though. When I spoke to Eileen Norman, the president of the Little People's Association, the brilliant and badass Alice Wong actually introduced me to her. Thank you, Alice. You know, Eileen does not like sideshows. And she explained her point eloquently and convincingly. What is it she doesn't like about them? As a little person, she wants to be equal to everyone. She lives in San Francisco where she can blend in and where people don't look at her and pick her up and things like that. So that is her perspective. I spoke to a natural named Xander Lovecraft. A lot of people know him. He's a great performer. He's been in this industry for a long time. He's also a little person. His father is a little person. He said that he's been stared at his whole life and people have made fun of him. And he said, if you're going to stare at me, I want you to stare at me because I'm hammering a steel spike up my nasal cavity and you think I should be dead. That's what he said. There are different opinions, and I respect Xander and I respect Eileen. I think they're actually both right. And all I'm asking people is just to take a look at my book and just be open-minded. And also for people who are not disabled, just try to recognize more that there's a lot of disabled people here. That you may become disabled one day. And they should be part of our society. You know what I'm saying? And I guess the big debate, and I'll leave it at this, is you know, do disabled people all kind of blend in? Or do some of them emphasize their difference in an artistic way? And as a non-disabled person, I feel like I can understand both of these views. But, you know, read the book and you can have your own opinion about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been great.
Okay.